launching a living, breathing Man Booker Prize winner. Paul's book, The Sellout, as I'm sure most of you know, has been a massive international bestseller. And I can assure you that those of you who have not read it yet, you're in for a hell of a ride. It's a biting satire, it'll have you laughing out loud, and I promise you it's like nothing you've ever read before. As one reviewer said, which I loved, it's like demented angels wrote it.
So earlier during our breakfast, we spoke about the slippery notion in literature called the voice and also style. So I wanted to find out from you, is voice and style the same thing? And earlier when you spoke, you seem to have an issue with this thing called voice. Is there such a thing called voice?
I can't remember what I said earlier, actually. I actually liked what I said. I don't know, I think I was saying earlier that, I struggle with the notion of what voice is. For me, it's that point where I just figure out the point of view of the narrator, and then it just happens, but that's the start. And I think, I was talking to Bongani earlier, it's like, I struggle with that notion, because I think it often gets attached to writers of color. It's the voice, and that's all that they hear, or whatever. I don't know what any of that means, And it's a way of just hearing what you want to hear sometimes, and not hearing shortcomings or other things. And it's just something I don't know how to characterize, And I think, I started writing poetry, and in poetry you hear the term voice a lot, it comes up a lot. And it took me a long time to just kind of ignore that, and just to try to pay attention to putting the words on the page that are supposed to be there, and the words that I want to be on the page, and not like kowtow to how somebody thinks I should sound, or how I should write, and all these other things. And I remember being in a poetry workshop, and a woman, her name was Mary Green, she pointed to this word in a poem on it, and she went, "Yeah, that word, that doesn't belong there, that feels forced." And I was a little young, not that young, and I got all defensive, and I went back and I went, wow, she really just saw right through, she was absolutely right. It was me trying to adopt some kind of stylized, it was some reggae word. And I was like, man, but it got me to think that she doesn't know me. She wasn't there when I was writing it, but she could just look at this page and point to this word and go, yeah, that's not supposed to be there, that's forced. And it really made me pause a little bit. And I think maybe this is a little bit to what we were talking about this morning. It's like, it's about writing with an intentionality, with a sense of purpose a little bit. Even if you don't know where you're going, But it's, and then I think that's where whatever voice is, starts out, at least for me.
I read in the New York Times a couple of months ago, they have this column called By the Book. And they were interviewing an essayist, a novelist called Francine Prose. And the interviewer said to her, are you a fiction or non-fiction person? Not even writer, are you a fiction or non-fiction person? And then she snapped out. She says, I'm a sentence person. So reading your stuff, reading your work, what I take home with is that you seem to be, for me, a cinematic person.
Cinematic.
Yeah, so I read this and I see a couple of films almost, split screens, almost at the same time. But I see film, I see film in the way you write. I don't even want to say imagery or something. I just see film, just see it right there happening. I want to find out from you, do you think when you have a story to tell, what decides the story? The genre or the story itself? So for example, Do you feel that this will go best through poetry, or through the essay form, or through non-fiction, or through this? What decides the story for you? Which, I mean, in terms of when you think of the genre to tell, what decides?
For me, it's pretty simple. I just write fiction. So, if I'm going to write it down, 99% of the time, it's going to be fiction. I think when I was thinking about transitioning from poetry to prose, I would have these thoughts, and I'd go, yeah, that's a play I'm never going to write. Or, I kind of just know a little bit for the most part, I think. But, yeah, I don't write very much. It's not something I enjoy doing, really. So,
And I can relate.
And I try to just write when I have something to say. And then occasionally somebody will challenge me to ask me to write something. And most of the time I say no. But every now and then I think about why I'm saying no. And then sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, it's something that I want to write about, but I'm a little afraid. And then that'll make me pause. It doesn't happen much. And then I'll, every now and then, tackle that. But it's so laborious. It's such a pain in the ass that I try to avoid it. But I don't really think in terms of the genre. I think in terms of just. So my favorite book, which is this book, Slumberland. I wrote 50 pages. I didn't know what it was. And I showed it to my agent. My agent thinks I'm a genius, so she's the best. But she took it out and shopped it, and I was like, oh no, I'm not ready for that, but it was too late. And I was fortunate enough to find a guy who was actually the editor of this book, because everybody else rejected it. And he bought it, sat down, and he went, it's the best advice that I've ever gotten. He just said, just tell the story. And I went, oh yeah, that's right, I'm writing a story. It's, everything was there, but some of it was 300 pages later, some of it was in the middle, some of it, but I just, I kind of just forgot, that I was telling a story.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, I teach, and I think people get intimidated by narrative, like they feel like a narrative is supposed to be in a certain way, it's supposed to be a certain tone, or play out in a certain way. And then, so you have students that are very smart, good writers, but they're just afraid, And I use some advice that a poet friend of mine uses when he teaches little kids. He goes, write a poem, and the kids just freeze. And he goes, okay, yeah, don't write a poem, and then go. So it's the same advice in a weird way, just tell the story, and then don't tell a story, just write. But it's about just giving yourself whatever that leeway is that you need to, get whatever's in your head out on the page.
I read somewhere that the Sellout, the manuscript of the Sellout was turned down by 18 publishers in the UK. 18. And after maybe, I don't know after how long, just got 2 projects, maybe after a year or 2, it won the Man Booker Prize. Let's not forget that. It won the Man Booker Prize, this book, right? And someone asked you something, have you ever had a call from, or just had something from those who turned it down? I'm sure they must be kicking their asses. What's the story about that? And how did you feel when they turned it down? How did it impact on you as a writer, your sense of worth, self-worth?
Well, thankfully I didn't know anything about that until after I won. And some reporter had said it, and I was like, yeah, I didn't know. But it's always interesting, everyone always asks me, why do you think that happened? Like, no one ever asks the poet, I don't understand that. But, One World, which published the book, they actually rejected the book also. Yeah, my agent told me that, But thankfully they did something that we just don't often do, which is they went back, A guy who, I don't want to name him, but he's a book editor at a big London.
Name him.
His name is Andrew Hogan. And he met Juliet, the woman that runs One World, and he was like, I can't believe no one's published this fucking book. What is going on? And it made her go back, you know, and obviously what happened, happened. And, but, you know, that's, I don't feel any certain kind of way about it. I'm deeply grateful, you know. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get all sentimental, but, you know, I think one thing is interesting is it's interesting the reception that the book has got for me abroad as opposed to the States, because it's not the same necessarily. Yeah. And there's a certain open-mindedness, because I think it can be construed as a certain distance from the subject matter, certain different things, none of them bad necessarily. But so for me, that's interesting. And then so, I think, you know, after I finished the book, it had, you know, pretty good success in the States. It was interesting that there was so little foreign reception. So even on my other books, which, you know, I like just fine, I mean, usually there's some immediate foreign sales, but with this one, even though it's by far my most successful book, there was no foreign action. I thought that was interesting. And, you know, I'd go to my agent, hey, what's going on with that, you know? She's like, I don't know, you know, we're working on it, blah, blah, blah. You know, she, you know, in a weird way, this is a dilemma that I had been struggling with for a long time as a writer, you know, because I think I started writing, I don't know why, but I was determined to try to be unique somehow. What's so funny about that? You guys all right over there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe they can share with us. Okay, they will share after.
All right. I'm trying as best as I can. I know it, but I'm paranoid. Yeah, but you know, this was like a thing that I've been struggling with, you know, for a long time. And you know, like what's legible? You know, what's my legibility? What's my responsibility? So at the end, when I said that I started writing poetry, at the end of my first year, the professor came up to me. She didn't come up to me. We had a meeting. I got a C+ in poetry, which is crazy. Anyways. But she said to me, I think you should stop writing. I think you should think about you know, because I was really struggling with people not understanding what I was doing, all these things. And so that year ended, and the next year I had Allen Ginsberg as a professor. And at the end of that year, I had finally written a poem that I actually liked. I was like, man, I'm on to something here. This, whatever reason, that poem sort of spoke to me in a way that nothing else I'd written had before. So I remember reading that poem at the end of that first year, and there was this kid who was like, yeah, I don't understand this poem, this is garbage, this is Jewish. I'm complete, I have no idea what's going on. So we had Ginsberg as a professor the next year. And he said, let's start off the class, bring in your best poem. And for me, that was still my best poem, read it, same group of students. So I read the poem, and when I finished reading it, the same kid that hated the poem before was like, oh, this is genius. Oh, genius. You know, this whole complete, you know, 180 turnaround. And, you know, I was really struggling with what, you know, what do I need to do to be understood, all these kind of things. And then after class, I asked him, I said, you know, what happened? And he said, well, I don't know, I was in New York for 3 months over the summer, and, you know, his head had expanded, his ears had expanded. You know, and so for me, it wasn't like a question of, oh yeah, whatever I do, people will, you know. But it kind of freed me up a little bit. And then I was very lucky is that I had another professor, a guy named Lou Asikoff, who after I told him about this other professor who was like, yeah, I should stop writing, I told him about it, he was like, look, you're trying to do something that no one else has done before, you know? He's like, you're trying to break new ground. And he said something to me that for me was like, not advice necessarily, but information that I tried to hold on to, which was people will learn to read you. You know, and I don't think he said it cavalierly, you know. And it's a process. It's always a process of who we read, how we read. These things are just ongoing, you know. And you know, if I think about my own reading history, you know, there are books that I love that now I look and I go, oh, I can't believe I love this book. You know, but then there are other books that I was like, man, I wish I had gotten this earlier. My life would have been easier or different. You know, so it shifts. You know, and I don't think we're always used to talking about that shift. You know, everything things like set in stone all the time.
I'll tell you, just before I left home right now, I said to my wife, man, the guy's sense of humor and satire is out of this world, completely out of this world. And I met him this morning, either he was tired or not, but he's so calm, and I said, laid black, and so relaxed. You know, he's nothing like his prose. And his prose is completely mad. Like it's, you know, really, you started making me think, how does Tom Wolfe, for example, you know, when he used to write things like Bonfire of the Vanities, you can just imagine him laughing, like, you know, I'm having so much fun. And it's like, you know, does your work make you laugh too?
My wife.
I mean, your work.
My work. My wife definitely makes me laugh. I mean, she's insanely funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't write it for the laughter necessarily. You know, I don't. I just write, and that's how it comes out. And it's the humor part that's another job. You know, like to be funny, that's not a job I want. You know, and I'm glad that the books are funny, but they're just, hopefully it's just, so this is like something I haven't really thought about until recently. But, you know, I read a bit of the book in some place and everybody was just cracking up the entire time, like everyone's laughing. Then I read the exact same passage at another place and no one laughed at all. They were listening very hard and appreciative, but for whatever reason, tone of my voice, my mood of the place, no one fucking laughed. And so, but that's absolutely fine with me. You know, one of the reasons I stopped writing poetry is you have to read all the time. I don't like reading very much. And the other thing is, there's a response. And as a writer, I got used to hearing that response. And I remember writing a poem once, and I went, kind of like what you were saying, and I went, oh, they're going to really like that, that's going to be funny. And I really stopped in my tracks, and I went, yeah, that's not why I write. You know, I don't write to hope to elicit some reaction that's favorable. You know, that's not why I write, you know?
Yeah, I hear you, and I don't want to prolong that, and I don't want to pick up a beef with you, which I'm going ahead to. You might not intend to elicit laughter. And listen, you're a serious writer, I take you seriously. But honestly, or my honesty, not yours, maybe, you have managed to condense is not the word, sort of collapse maybe, from style and the story. And you might not intend to do that, but I can tell you, 80% to 90% of the people, I'm just making a prediction, who read your work I'm using might to cover my heads, might remember the laughter than the story. It's hell of a laughter. Yeah, you know the satirist, you know the stand-up, but really what, at least what I take from here are the laughter. So of course I happen to remember the story, especially from Slumberland and this one. I wanted to ask about poetry, but I think it's going to slow us down a bit. The next question is sort of elaborate, so I'm going to read it, so I'm not very completely prof. Your book and others before, SELLOUT and others before, tend to lean towards the equal opportunity offender to everyone and all kinds of people and communities. Blacks get their rep, Jews, WASPs, etc. In fact, the cold tale of SELLOUT reads so risky and yet so edgy. After the death of his black nationalist father at the hands of the police, the main character, a black man, tries to restore his town's sense of self and pride. In the process, he brings back slavery as a way of bringing back pride to his town. Now that made me curious. Why does a black man enslave other black folks and not maybe institute, say, reverse slavery and subjugate white folks? Why did you have your character enslave other darkies and not enslave people like this?
First off, he's not really enslaving anyone. I mean, it's not. He's got a novel that he's not really enslaving. I think that's important. But I think the other thing is that the reverse thing is just so easy. Like, it just doesn't interest me. You know? I think, I don't know, I think I understand the need for that, you know, because it makes things a little bit palatable somehow, you know? And just, for me, it's the difficult stuff is the stuff that I enjoy tackling, you know? And, yeah, I think that's it, basically. And, you know, and I love the notion of, I mean, this is like, you know, I've been writing for a while. My first book, you know, I had this guy, he's got this crazy family history. And there's a guy in his family history who's a free black, you know, in the antebellum South. But he's a dancer. And he sees these slaves picking cotton in the field and he falls in love with the movements. So he runs away into slavery because he wants to learn how to move like that. You know? So it's kind of perverted, ugly, crass, but hopefully there's still some kind of weird beauty in there in a weird way. And then this one, it was one of the notions that I really liked was the notion of a masochistic slave. What does that mean? What does that speak to like a bigger picture? You know, these are like words that don't often get used with. You know, it's like the African American experience is so narrow, you know, and so, and I don't think, I'm not forcing these is to make a fake experience. I'm not trying to do that. But for me, it's like, come on, can we explore this a little bit? You know, because masochism is just a human, it is part of the human condition, you know, and it's for me, it's about how am I going to render that, you know.
Now I have to read the next one as well because it's a bit long. Your chief protagonist is a weirdly charming screwball. He is also unnamed, but is sometimes referenced as me. That's what his reference had. And his woman, the sumptuously foul-mouthed Mapesa, Delisa Dawson, calls him Bonbon. He's also some type of a tragic hero. I mean, the idea of a black man reinstituting slavery in our times, decolonial times, Black Lives Matter, and Trump's naked fascism might seem curious. Do you care as a writer whether your fiction speaks directly to the time you write it? Or does it have a sort of a total life of its own in some faraway creative crevices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, everybody's you can't help but be a person of your time. You know, that's can't get around that. But, you know, like, I think for all this stuff that's in the book is, I like to think that I'm writing about things that are timeless. You know, but then everybody attaches their own temporal concerns to the book. So it took me, the book's like almost 3 years old, it took me 5 years to write. You know, so this is before Trump, before Black Lives Matter. And I think part of this is for me, I realized, you know, it's like one of those things that I've just realized is, every now and then, you know, I meet these black writers and they come up to me and they say, oh, thank you, thank you. And I was like, what do you think? It's because I kind of just write what the fuck I want to write about. And I think there's a notion that you have, especially as an African American writer, you've got to address these, not necessarily in contemporary fashion, but there's these contemporary issues that you have to address. So, and I think hopefully this is expanding, but one of the things that for me doesn't interest me so much is addressing not just issues of race, but just general societal issues in the past. Because I think people are very comfortable reading about this in the past. Because it absolves them of some culpability, some responsibility, just an examination of themselves in a weird way. And for me, this stuff is, this is just ongoing. This is just how we treat each other. So a woman asked me today, I did this radio interview. She was talking about Colson's book, Underground Railroad, which I haven't read. And she said this thing, oh, this has a certain, this kind of resonates for us in South Africa, this history and all this kind of stuff. I was like, yeah, that's fine. And I didn't say this to her because it didn't occur to me until after I hung up the phone. And, you know, because she was talking about, like, are these books relatable? I'm putting words in her mouth. And I just don't think about literature that way in terms of it's relatable. But, like, even in the way that she was talking about it, like, even in discussing slavery, slavery is endemic to every place on earth in some form or fashion before slavery. You know, but it's how, you know, we just see this as black slavery, all these other things. You know, I'm not trying to balance one over the other, but just about how we think about this stuff. You know, I just get unnerved that everybody just sees something in this one box. You know, and I think about, you know, like one of my favorite things about, this is a word thing to say my favorite thing about slavery, but is this beautiful Japanese Mizoguchi movie called Sancho the Bailiff, which is an unbelievable film. And it just reminds me so much of my notions of the history of African American slavery, because there are just so many commonalities. But this is a film set in feudal Japan, like, you know, in the 15th century, 16th century or something. You know, but it's just crosses all these things, because it's just about the human condition, the way we teach each other, the way we treat each other, you know. But we don't necessarily read that way, and that's for me very problematic. And I'm sorry I'm rambling a little bit, but like one of the things is, you know, I've been asked to do all these blurbs. I've been thinking about blurbs for some reason. Who blurbs my book? What do they say? Thomas Pynchon, all this other kind, you know, compared to these variety of writers. And I was like, man, I have never seen a book by a writer of color, or not by a white writer, compared to a writer of color. Maybe Murakami, that's about it. But you know, it's just interesting to me. No one ever says, oh, this person writes like Colson Whitehead. Oh, this person writes like Danzy Senna. Yeah. You know, oh, this person writes like Sandra Cisneros. It's in terms of, you know, this way that we read.
On page 58, you talk about how the town of Dickens, where the action is centered, how it kind of disappears, right? So the signpost and everything disappears, right? So for me, it reminded me of Kapuscinski's book. He wrote a non-fiction book called Another Day of Life about Angola. And he writes about a village, which could be like a sort of a squatter camp. We call it squatter camp in South Africa. A village made out of zinc, of tin houses, disappearing overnight. So when the visitors came in the morning, the entire village of 1 million tin room houses were gone. I mean, was gone completely. And so I was wondering, were you making with the disappear? You disappearing Dickens is not the same as Kapuscinski observing the actual disappearance, right? But I was just wondering anyway, was it some kind of oblique commentary on gentrification? Or the disappearance of old values, maybe? What was it?
You get to answer that. I don't have to answer that. That's not my job. But I mean, I think for me, the notion of this town, Dickens, disappearing it's a hard thing to say. You know, for me, it's part of the notion of that the demographics of Los Angeles, where I'm from, are changing. And so certain neighborhoods are, I can't say they're not, it depends to how you want to define them disappearing. Because the streets are still there, but the populations are different. Sometimes they're renamed. So it does happen. But it starts from something a friend of mine said, I don't know, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And he was just talking about, I think I even mentioned in the book, but he was talking about how little towns in Russia would disappear from nuclear accidents. I think it's all apocryphal, you know, but I love that image of just towns disappearing on the map. So even before all the stuff that you're getting at, you know, for me it's about that image, that notion, and then how do I render that in ways that are important to me, you know? And then some of it's personal, like, you know, I grew up in this working class neighborhood in Los Angeles that never had a name, but that neighborhood's changing, and so they put these signs, you know, around the neighborhood about, oh, I think our neighborhood now is called Reindeer Park for no reason, really. But, you know, and so for me that's interesting about like when things get labeled, how do they get labeled, where do we live, all these kind of things. So I mean, all that stuff is in there, you know, but it's also about, you know, identity. You know, and how do we define identity? And it's a word that, I don't want to say it's overused, but we don't think about all the ways that we use it. You know, I was watching this documentary not so long ago about this Japanese sake brewer. He kept talking about the identity of his sake. You know, because not branding, but the identity of the liquid in the bottle. You know, and it was just, man, yeah, I don't know why I'm saying that. It just popped in my head really. But for him, it was everything. You know, not to be compromised, not to be. You know, you mentioned gangs and identity. I mean, there's just so many countervailing senses of identity all the time. And like language, like a lot of things, it's just never one thing. You know?
Well, I thought maybe the metaphor for the impermanence of life as well.
Yeah.
That life is cyclical as well. I'm told we left with 5 minutes. The great thing about it is that it came right towards my very last question. So, good timing. So all your books, most intensely Slumberland and White Boy Shuffle, are A, replete with musical references, like a ton full of them, mostly jazz and rap, as well as hip-hop culture beyond rap music. B, the writing itself is nothing short of literally free jazz. Says, for example, Coltrane's last recorded album. But then when you pick it up as well, you can pick up sort of Bob Dylan's earlier free associative ramblings as well. So the question that I have for you is that what role does music play, not actually when you are writing, but in your life at a psychic level? What role does sound and music play in your life?
Yeah, I have to disagree with you about the hip hop and the jazz thing. But, I mean, it's definitely in there, but there's just so much shit in there. Yeah, I think I said it to you earlier. Is music is one of the ways that I figured out how I think. Use it to challenge myself on so many levels. I mean, social levels. My intellectual levels. I think about being in college and sitting at the library, and the one good thing about the school that I went to is they had a great jazz selection in the library. And, I have a ton of friends that were musicians, playing all kinds of music. We grew up listening to all kinds of music. But again, what kind of music you listen to was part of your identity, all these kind of things, And for the most part, I listened to the shit that no one else was listening to, Not no one, but one or two people. Like I was never just alone. Yeah, it's just, for me, it's just like a track. It's like a soundtrack to, how I've changed, all these experiences. I always tell this story. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, but, just a regular neighborhood. And somebody asked me once to think about the first record I bought. The first record I bought was Parliament Funkadelics. Mothership Convention. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about. But, I grew up listening to all kind of shit, Creedence Clearwater, because we used to live in Santa Monica, so I listened to whatever everybody else listened to. But for whatever reason, that record was a change. It was an addition, not a change, but it was another brick in the fucking wall, and I love that fucking record. But I remember buying that record, album. I weighed 80 pounds. And I was like, oh shit, how do I get this home without someone taking it from me? Because it's a record, it's obviously there. So I was like, trying to carry it on the side so no one would see it, but I made it. But I know there are just so many, I think like most people, music is important, And then, so sometimes it's just a shortcut to be, not to the reader, because I'm not necessarily thinking to the reader, but for me it's a shortcut to get from point A to B, or to make a point that I don't feel needs to be elaborated,
Hi there. So I wanted to ask about chapter 2, which is a work of art. And I was just wondering about the risk that comes with keeping the chapter that succinct. And
which is chapter 2?
West Side, motherfucker. I love that.
Yeah.
Just the decision and the risk that involved. You can tell us about that.
That's a really good question. So, I mean, the book, there are no rules to writing. I'm aware of what the rules are, or what they can be. So I have a prologue that's like 30 pages, which, you don't see that often. I introduce important characters at page 150. You know what I mean? So And for me, it's about, we were talking about voice earlier, and it's like something, and part of voice is about musicality, it's about rhythm, and every book has that, you know? And then so I remember getting to this thing and trying to, again, figure out who this character is, and is this part of him, does it feel like, and it was, for me it was like really important to kind of just, it was like a timeout. Because the book gets serious in a weird way after that, you know? And it was also for me as a thing, as, it's not like this is part of me necessarily, but it was for me very grounding in that little bit to go, West Side nigga what, you know? And it's like this, but it's also a rhythm that's not in the book very much, but it's a way to show that this is part of this narrator's experience. And it's a bit of a, it's a fake fucking on his part, but it's nonetheless a fucking in a weird way, you know? But for me, that was like really important, and I was like, yeah, I have nothing else to say after that. I don't know if you could make a chapter that's only 3 words, but I'm doing it, and I'm just, you know, gonna move on, really. But that's, no one's ever asked me that. I appreciate that question.
I wanted to ask about the 5 years, and was there a point where things lined up? And is there a point where things line up and you get into a groove, and you, because it's dense, but there are no gaps. Everything's there that ought to be. And I thought, like, did you eventually get into a groove where you understood what you were doing? And if you did get into that groove, how did you do that?
Yeah, I don't actually think about it as a groove necessarily. But so, I mean, it took me a year and a half to start the book. Like, I made all these, not false starts. So, you know, the neighborhood in the book is this quote-unquote inner-city neighborhood where people farm and have livestock and ride horses and all this kind of stuff. And so that neighborhood is sort of based on a real place. That's not what it is in the book, but there's some little elements of that in the book. And so I thought I had to start there. You know, I thought it was really important to how do I do whatever it is, my voice or whatever, and make it absurd and real at the same time. And I liked it, but it wasn't right. It wasn't where the thing was. And then I was at a dinner party, and the hosts were this married couple, they were both lawyers. And they were just talking about some legal case, and then it just hit me. I was like, oh, the book starts in the Supreme Court. Because all this stuff where I'm going to, that's where it would go. And then as soon as I knew where it started, and then I figured it out, you know, from there. And then I just figured it out. But for me, it's really important to kind of just know where I'm going at some level. And I thought I knew, but I didn't really know. But then when I figured it out, then I just, because then it's over there. I don't know exactly how I'm getting there, but I know where I'm going. So for me, that's the important thing, you know. And then it's just all time.
When you write?
Yeah, I don't. You know, I mean, I really, it's not like I'm not aware that I have a readership or anything, you know, but I'm not writing to an audience. You know, it's, yeah, these are things that, you know, at some level I figured out. But with this book, I didn't write it to my wife, but she was kind of right there, you know, and it's like writing to a best friend, you know. And then you get to tell the story. So when you're telling the story, you get to decide what you want to explain, what you don't want to explain, you know? And it's for me, that was really important, you know? And there was a sense of trust that I have with this fake reader, because she never read any of it until, we weren't even together at the time, now I think about it, you know? But it was, for me, it was just like this, there's a word I'm looking for that I can't have. But just this image, not necessarily a muse, but just this thing. Because I think I can't think about who's reading my book and how are they going to think about it. It's just, yeah, it's so limiting. So I don't understand that. And I think early on, it was again when I was writing poetry, and a woman named Samantha came up to me after reading, and she said to me, she went, "It must suck being you." And I was like, I think I'm doing all right, you know. But I asked her what she meant. And she went, everybody only gets 50% of what you're trying to do. And I just had never thought about it, because I pretty much get everything that I'm trying to do, at least in my way. You know? But I was like, yeah, I'm cool with that. You know? Because that 50% is going to be different for everyone. You know? And And for me, it's just, I just can't try to, I don't think it's pandering necessarily right to an audience, but for me, I have to tell the story the way I want to tell it. And again, it goes back to that, hopefully people will learn to read, you know, and it's, and it comes with a trust, and it also comes with a trust of the readership. You know, my sister's a playwright, and she said something to me that I think is really important. She says, you know, people are very, very smart. And I try to operate on that level, you know, and that's a trust with the reader also, you know. And, you know, I was talking about I teach, and sometimes I have students that are struggling with, you know, the dimensionality of their characters, or struggling with who to talk to and what tone and what voice. You're talking about, somebody was like, are you fiction or nonfiction? And I think so much what informs me is nonfiction. And there's a guy named Studs Terkel who did these beautiful American oral histories. He has a book, one of my favorite ones of his is a book called Working. It's just people talking about their jobs. But it's so important because you realize if you ask a person the right question, they're so fucking insightful. They're so goddamn smart. You know, and there's just, I don't know what that area is, but I just try to operate in that area for me. And trust the reader not to necessarily have to rely on all the tropes about how we read.
But you are the first American and first Black American to win a Booker Prize.
It's only been open to Americans for like 3 years, so it's like 50 years have gone by. But I mean, I'm extremely appreciative of the recognition. You know, I work hard. I work hard, and it means a lot to me. So that part of it feels good, you know. The first Black thing, the first American thing, for me, it's just as long as these doors keep opening up, that bookshelf gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know, I'm cool to be a part of that. Yeah. Excellent. What a fine night.